So let's talk about modern processing techniques. There is so many different ways in which we can process sound. And so I'm just going to be scratching the surface, but I'm going to be showing you some of my favorite and perhaps, in my opinion, the most useful modern processing techniques that you should know. Before I dive in, I thought I'd just mention our new cohort-based course, which is going to be running next month. It's called Create 30. So all of the students that sign up are going to be creating one musical idea every single day. We're going to be doing it as a cohort. So there's going to be a lot of accountability there. It's going to be really exciting and fun as well. So if you're interested, go check out the link in the description. So the first technique is Shimmer Reverb. You might be familiar with how this sounds. Let's just show you the example that we're going to be making. That's dry. And that's what it sounds like with the Shimmer Reverb on. It's a beautiful sound, and it's actually quite easy to do once you know the fundamentals of how it works. So the first thing that you're going to need to create this effect is some sort of pitching device. And we're going to be using in Ableton the grain delay. So let's go grab it. It'll be in the delay folder here, grain delay. And what this is going to be doing is it's going to be taking individual samples from the audio stream and then pitching those and delaying those little samples up and down to create this effect. So in fact, instead of just creating this from scratch, I'm just going to go over to here to my little disclosure arrow and grab this plugin, this preset called 5. This is a good one, and this is called 5 because it's going to be pitching it up 5 semitones. So I'm just going to put it onto 100% dry wet and then show you what it's doing. So as you can see, it's pitching it up 5 semitones, but in this case, I want to pitch it up 1 octave. So I'm just going to click on this little 5 in next to the pitch slider here and just put it up to 12, which is 1 octave. And then let's have a listen to this. So as you can see, there's some sort of weird stuff going on. So just quickly before I get ahead of myself, I'm just going to put this in a audio effect rack and I'm going to process this in parallel. So create a new chain, rename this chain dry. And because my lowercase m key isn't working for some reason, look, I'm trying to click it now. I'm just going to call this Shimmer in capitals. Don't ask me why it's not working. But yeah, so I'm just going to solo this chain. We're going to listen to this, and then I'm going to pull up this spray amount, and that's going to make each grain larger. I'm just going to mess around with this frequency a bit. A few more things. I'm going to pull this time amount up around about almost to the maximum. And that's just how quickly it's delaying it. So now it's going to be a little bit smoother because the delay time is a little bit longer. And I'm going to pull down this dry wet a little bit. Even though we are processing in parallel, this dry wet I'm going to pull down because we're going to put some more effects on afterwards. So far so good. This is sort of pitching it up a little bit, but it's not really giving us that real crystally shimmery tone. And how we get that is actually by the feedback amount. So this is pitching it up 12 semitones, as we can see here. So if we turn up the feedback, what's going to happen is the output signal from here is going to feed back into the input. And so this 12 semitoned pitched up signal is going to feed back in and then get pitched up again, and then that's going to feed back again and then get pitched up again, and it's going to have this like cascading beautiful crystally sound that we all know and love. So let's put up the feedback a bit and have a listen. Great, so only a few more little ingredients that we have to do. I'm going to grab a reverb now and place that just after this shimmery grain delay. And I'm just going to put up the decay time a bit and maybe put up these diffusions and reflections as well. And I think I'm just going to cut out some of the low end of the reverb. Let's have a listen now. We're almost there. It's still a little bit harsh though, so I'm just going to try and make it a little bit softer with a delay. And I am now going to put this delay onto 100% dry wet, and I think I'm going to put it on ping pong. And I'm going to unsync these as well, so the left and the right are going to be different. And I'm going to turn it onto time mode as well, and just sort of play around with this a little bit. Cool, so that is pretty much the effect, and you can experiment with a whole bunch of things from here. You just need some sort of thing pitching it up, some sort of thing reverbing, and then I'm just using a delay in this case to make it smooth. But you can actually use maybe another reverb if you wanted to make it smoother. That way you can experiment with putting reverb before the grain delay or after, or duplicating multiple reverbs before and after. You can experiment with other things, other types of modulation as well. So maybe just like chucking a chorus in there and seeing how that goes. Or maybe even a vibrato as well. So that would probably be a good idea, sort of vibrato, pitching it around a bit so it wobbles a bit. And then the last thing I'm going to do in the end of this chain is just add an EQ. So I'm going to add a channel EQ because I don't want to be surgical with this at all. I want to be soft and I want to be gentle with how I shape this. I'm just going to take some low ends and a little bit of highs out as well. So it's a little bit more less harsh in the high end and less boomy in the low end. And so that will just sit really nicely with this dry audio signal here as well. It's a really cool effect and actually has a lot of flexibility to it as well. You just need some sort of, pitching device and then a few time-based effects that are going to wash out the signal, and you need a reverb in there somewhere as well. The next one I'm going to discuss is multiband processing. So what do I mean by multiband processing? This is when you split the frequency spectrum into multiple different bands, so like low, mids, and high, and then you can process each band separately. So it's still the same tone, but we're just going to be processing each frequency band differently. So how do we do this? Well, I'm going to use a EQ8 device. And just before I get into this, I have made a more in-depth tutorial than what I'll be going into on multiband processing in the past. So if you're interested in this technique, I'll leave a link there as well. But this EQ8, I'm just going to put it into a effect rack with just Command G. And then what I'm going to do is actually just split out where I think the low end is in this sound. So let's have a listen. Quite a harsh sound. I'm just going to turn this one onto a steep cut. Around about there sounds good. I'm just going to rename this low and then duplicate this chain. And in this one, rename it mid and flip this signal the other way. As simple as that. Flip it. And I'm going to go grab one more of these cut things and just try and define where the mid frequencies are in this sound. So that's sort of what sounds like mid frequencies to me. I think once I start going up any higher, it's going to start getting to that high frequency range. So I'm going to keep it there and then duplicate this chain, Command D, rename it high, and flip this band one more time. So flip it and then it's just going to be the highs, and you don't want to touch it. Remember, when you're flipping, you don't really want to touch them because it's going to create a nice crossover if you don't touch it. But if you do touch it, you can get sort of like holes and gaps in the frequency spectrum. So yeah, now once this is separated into all the different bands, you can see that it doesn't really sound much different to the original. And that's what we want. So now we can start processing these things differently. So in the low end band, maybe I want some saturation or some distortion in there. So let's have a look in the drive and color folder. Let's go grab maybe some saturation. So there is so much creative freedom you do have once you start separating this into multiple bands. So you can process the low end however you want, but just try and keep it mono compatible, because you don't want to destroy that low end mono image. We want to keep it quite solid and centered. But moving on, the mid band, I like to put some echo on there. So I'm gonna go grab a echo device and place it on there and see how this goes. And remember, because we're multiband processing, we're not necessarily parallel processing. We want to keep some dry signal in there as well. So just treat these as if you're doing, direct serial processing, but just in multiple different bands in this case. So here, let's have a listen. Maybe I could put on ping pong. That's sounding pretty cool. And then in this high band, I'm just going to put some reverb. Let's increase the decay time quite a lot. So that's pretty cool, because now once I start sweeping this filter, you can see that in the mids, there's going to be some echoing. In the highs, there's going to be some long reverb tail. In the lows, there's going to be that sort of saturated growly low end, which is pretty cool. So let's have a little sweep through and see how that goes. So I think that's pretty cool, and it's a lot of fun to mess around with multi-band processing. So if you haven't already, definitely go try it out. So this next technique is using multi-effects plugins, things like Serum Effects and Soundtoys Effects Rack. These are plugins that have multiple different effects inbuilt in them, and it's really easy and fun to experiment with some of the presets in there. You can use them as an inspiration source or just the actual processing on your sound. So let's have a look at this. I think it's a pretty cheesy sound, but it's sort of like a trance pluck. I'm going to I think I want some like space or maybe some delay sort of sounds on there. So I'm going to load up Serum Effects here, if I can find it. It's just here. And let's have a look at some of the presets that we have in here. So maybe I'll go into pads and Celestial Light. That sounds pretty cool. That's pretty intense. Oh, I like the delay on this. The reverb's pretty cool as well, but the great thing about Serum Effects is you can really take advantage of all of the things that we have on offer in Serum. So we have all of these LFOs here and all of these envelopes that we can use as well. So maybe I can grab this LFO1 and sort of map it to the reverb mix knob. Just sort of have that moving around a bit. Maybe I could use the filter in here. Maybe I could grab some distortion as well and maybe just drive it a bit. Oops, I'm just going to turn that filter off. We could take advantage of Serum's filters here, so maybe some sort of formant filter. So So maybe we could do like another LFO here and assign that to the cutoff here. So it's going to be slowly moving around. I think I'm going to like unsync the BPM here and just turn the rate down as well. So now we have a whole bunch of little movements going on that's going to make this effect a little bit more interesting. So Serum Effects is really inspiring and good for things like this where we want some sort of sound design element or interesting effects going on. But Soundtoys Effects Rack is also really cool in a different way though. It really has a lot of presets dedicated for mixing style purposes. So you can chuck it on a drum rack or put it on a drum bus or even like a mix bus. But in this case, I just want to put it straight on this snare here. So I've got this snare here. And let's grab Effect Rack and have a go. Let's grab it and put it on this snare here. So keep in mind, this does take up a whole bunch of CPU. So just be careful with how you use this and how many instances of this that you use. And in fact, I would probably, if I really like an effect, I would just bounce it down into audio or freeze the track or do some sort of CPU saving thing to make it so my computer just doesn't crash every time I have to open this project. So I'm going to go into drums and let's have a look. Maybe this one. Oh, just going to turn the mix down a bit. So we've just got like a distortion and then like a slap back delay. I think I'm going to make it a bit quicker. And then you can go in here and just sort of play around with other things as well. Let's have a listen to that on and off. So that really thickens up the snare. It's really easy to do and very immediate. So I definitely recommend taking advantage of multi-effects plugins. So our next technique, and this seems like a pretty common one, is using tremolo devices to create rhythmic effects. So I've got this pad sound here. Pretty weird sort of sound. And I'm just gonna like non-rhythmically record some notes in. So as you can hear, it doesn't have any real rhythm to it, and it's kind of hard to integrate sounds that don't have rhythm to it into a rhythmic track. Unless you're making something like ambient music or you want some sort of ambient soundscape, it's kind of hard to incorporate these things. But using a tremolo device, you can really easily make this thing rhythmic. So there's multiple different tremolo devices out there. I'm pretty sure Logic has a stock tremolo device, and Soundtoys has the Tremolator device if you have the Soundtoys plugin bundle. In Ableton, we don't have a specific tremolo, but you can use the auto pan device. So let's go grab an auto pan. So I'm just going to go into this little drop down menu here and grab the tremolo preset. And that's going to be already ready to go for you. All you need to do is just tweak it a little bit. So this is set up to make your sound have a little bit of movement. But in this case, I want it to be really exaggerated. I'm going to put the amount all the way up to 100 and put it on this ramp down function. So now with this tremolo device chopping up the audio as it's going through it, it's going to sound like this. So we can mess around with this rate here. And also one of my favorite knobs here is the shape knob, and that's just going to make it sound a little bit more smooth. So you can see that the edges of this is a little bit more curved now. So it makes this stutter effect a little bit more natural sounding. So So the key here in making this effect sound good is the audio source. And this is a great audio source because there is a lot of movement in there. So the more movement we have underneath the tremolo, the more interesting the sound is going to be. It's not just going to be some thing that's just repeating and stuttering over and over and over every 16th note, but there's actually change and movement happening underneath the tremolo. So have a listen to that movement that we have. So we have a lot of texture going on in this patch. Just something to keep in mind when you're using this technique. Next technique here is reverse reverb. So I'm sort of categorizing this in the modern realm, but this is sort of becoming closer to a classic technique nowadays because it has been used by the likes of Pink Floyd and stuff like that. But it's really easy to do. Here I have this like guitar progression that I recorded for the last video that I made. And I just have a regular reverb here. And what I'm going to do in this case is reverse the audio signal. So just hit R on my keyboard to do that. And so if we think about what's happening here is we have a reversed audio signal, but we have a regular reverb. And to get a reverse reverb, I'm just going to bounce this out into a new track and then reverse the whole thing. So let's duplicate this track. I'm going to freeze it and then flatten it. And if we reverse this now, what's going to happen is we're going to have here a regular reverb and reversed audio, but here we have a reversed reverb and a regular audio. So the audio is going to be just as we recorded it, and the reverb is just going to be reversed, and all of the reverb is going to be swelling into each transient before it happens. So have a listen. It's a really fun effect to play around with and really useful if you do use it in the right way. Seems like at the moment we're talking a lot about reverbs, but this next technique is using distortion and reverb together and actually using distortion after a reverb. So that is going to create this really sustained, drawn out, like dark tone. Firstly, just have a listen to this metal ARP pluck. And if I grab a reverb, I'm just going to put the decay time up quite a bit. And then I'm going to go grab a distortion plugin. You can really use anything, just any type of saturator. I think I'm going to use Decapitator. And that's because I can really drive this thing quite a lot. So let's have a look at how this sounds once I start driving the reverb. So the distortion is after the reverb. So it sounds really crazy at the moment, and the key to this is adding some EQ afterwards. So let's go grab an EQ8, and I'm just going to place this on here and then sort of EQ out the lows because there's going to be a whole bunch of low-end artifacts introduced by this distortion, and same with the highs as well. I'm just going to EQ out sort of this mid-frequency band. So this is one of those sounds that doesn't necessarily sound too good in isolation, but once you start pairing it and contrasting it with other things in your track, you can actually make this really cool ambient textural dark tone out of this sound. So let's have a listen to this with the chord progression that I was just using earlier. Just fills out that background space nicely and gives it a really cool vibe. So this last technique is experimental return tracks, and it's not necessarily something that I need to dwell on too much because it is pretty straightforward. You're just going to be experimenting using different processing on return tracks, and don't be afraid to really just stack them up and layer them up. So let's have a look at this shimmery reverb. I'm just going to send some of this Shimmer Reverb into this return track B, and I'm just going to stack a whole bunch of things on here and just see how it goes. So if there's any of audio effects here that you haven't used, you don't really know what they do, don't be afraid to go in, choose some presets and place them on a return track and see how it goes. I've had a lot of success from doing this technique, funnily enough. So I'm just going to go into my modulators, or maybe pitch and modulation first, and sort of just going to click some things and see how it goes. I would usually listen to each thing as I'm adding it and tweak it along the way, but for the simplicity of the example, I'm not going to listen to anything. I'm just going to add everything onto this track and sort of tweak what I think might be good here. I'm going to add a little bit of sort of drive effects here, and then maybe I think I want to add a few different instances of beat repeat. This is pretty fun. So maybe a semi-subtle. I'm just going to click a few that I think look nice. And this vocal fun one is good as well. So let's have listen to how that is going so far. So experimental return tracks is definitely just something that I thought is worth mentioning. And if you haven't experimented with return tracks before, then definitely just go crazy and experiment and use all of the different presets and just explore and have some fun. So that's it for today. I know these are just a few processing techniques and there's so many out there, but if you haven't done any of these before, definitely go try them out for yourself and experiment. I cannot stress enough how key experimenting is for developing your skills as a producer and also developing your sound as well. If you've enjoyed the video today, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.